Squaresoft's foray into the CD-based era was a veritable success. Final Fantasy VII shattered sales records on both coasts, selling an astounding 2.3 million copies within 3 days of its Japanese release, and an additional 330,000 later that year in America. For the first time ever, Final Fantasy was a mainstream fixture in the gaming world. VII's departure from the series' signature conventions was originally perceived as risque. The game skated between elements of the past and present with adventurous new changes in system mechanics and story direction. In the end, those very tweaks were paramount to VII's success. When Square knew it had a hit on its hands, the company began production on number 8 the very same year, during VII's localization in the US. The series had to evolve even further, like no other in the franchise. Final Fantasy VIII was released in Japan on February 11, 1999, September 7th in the States. Development had run continuously for nearly 2 years. Sakaguchi graced the project once more as the executive producer, while Kitase, Nomura, and Uematsu reprised their respective roles. The experience that Square gained during the production of VII bolstered its understanding of the PlayStation hardware's capabilities. With this knowledge in hand, Kitase envisioned the next game sporting a more realistic look, and with Nomura's encouragement, a school days aesthetic similar to popular Japanese dramas and animes airing at the time. With this came realistically proportioned character models, the first the series had ever seen. And the ballad of Squall Leonhardt and Rinoa Hartley. Final Fantasies typically put you in the company of rogues, rebels, and mercenaries, but 8 established players as one of the trainees of Balam Garden, a military academy managed by the watchful eye of Headmaster Cid. Squall, an introverted gunblade specialist, was one of the school's most promising students. On the day of his graduation exam, he was contracted by the state of Delay to repel the forces of the invading Galbadian Empire. Along with fellow trainees Zell, a hot-headed brawler, Selphie, a cheerful nunchaku master, Cypher, a rebellious upperclassman, and Quistis, Squall's instructor. Squall's Galbadian encounter was the first of many. He eventually found himself under the commission of Rinoa, the spirited leader of an upstart rebellion group. Together, they become inextricably linked to the fate of Galbadia's leader, Sorceress Adia. A later objective called upon Squall and his unit, headlined by the romantic rifleman Irvine, to assassinate the sorceress. But when the plan goes awry, a plentitude of truths open themselves to Squall, prompting him to abandon all preconceived notions of the mission and his duty. A sorceress from the future, Ultimisia, was revealed as the true culprit, manipulating time itself in a bid to unite her dimension with the past. Together with his companions, Squall ventured into the Den of the Lion to restore order to the world and protect the ones dear to his heart. Final Fantasy VIII made bold new strokes in story and narration. The theme of love had always played a part in side stories prior, but for the first time, it was brought into the foreground as the main motivator for the protagonist's actions. It was, for all intents and purposes, a love story, with its cast of characters taking respective roles amid webs of tangled relationships. It was also the first Final Fantasy that delved into different frames of mind, from the internal narrative of Squall's thoughts to a side quest set in a completely different place and time. The realistic tone was made immediately clear by the opening score, an orchestral piece accompanied by a Latin choir and breathtaking full-motion video. Along with the game's title theme song, Eyes on Me, sung by Chinese pop star Fei Wong, 8 was the first of the series to feature lyrical scores. The boundaries that had separated Final Fantasy from other mediums of popular expression, like movies and music, had been broken. Eyes on Me later became a single that went on to sell 400,000 copies in Japan. One of Squall's first outings pitted him against the fiery Ifrit, who wasn't known as a summon or Esper, but as a GF, or Guardian Force. When these magical beasts were bested in combat, they became permanent additions to your party that could be equipped. GFs were powerful allies you could summon in battle, but outside of combat was where they were most useful, in the form of junctioning. the central feature of 8. Rather than pulling on armor with predetermined stats, players could assign magic siphoned from enemies, an action called drawing, and equip them to specific stats and attributes. Junctioning allowed for a great deal of customization and flexibility, bequeathing players all the elemental and status effect spells of the series at their beck and call. Apart from the radical changes in magic and summons, the combat structure, for the most part, resembled the 3-man active time battles from 7. Each of the characters' limit breaks, however, shed 7's limit bar and returned to the rare desperation moves from Final Fantasy VI. Squall, like Cyan before him, pulled off a series of blade strikes timed by the R1 trigger, while Zell utilized the spiritual successor of Sabin's blitz attacks. Weapons were no longer bought but upgraded, which took various parts collected in battle and used them in a crafting process. In addition, cars, trains, and shuttles comprised a large number of transportation options, although airships, flying fortresses, and the ubiquitous chocobo also made appearances. The chocobo was also featured in a minigame tie-in using the Pocket Station. The code to power it still exists in the North American release, but the peripheral never made it across the Pacific. One of Final Fantasy VIII's biggest side features was Triple Triad, a robust minigame that took place on a grid with numbered cards. Though not necessary, it was an interesting and rich diversion that awarded players persistent enough to play it. Determined card sharks could net Squall's legendary weapon, the Lionheart, with enough diligence. Riding the hype of its predecessor, Final Fantasy VIII's release in 1999 beat previous records set with 2.4 million copies sold in Japan, and in America, it became the best-selling game for 3 weeks after its debut in September. Critically, however, the game was received with mixed reactions. Most players and critics felt that the junctioning system was flawed and needlessly complicated, longing for the user-friendliness of 7's materia. Drawing magic from enemies was also cited as a repetitive task. Conversely, some embraced 8's bold system changes. Its storytelling remains amongst the most compelling the series has seen, and its following is one of the largest across the worldwide fanbase. Many speculated the next game in the series would go above and beyond the modern realism of 8, and into the realm of the future. It ultimately became a fond look at the past.